so transparent. So transparent. This Obama administration, so transparent with their machinations. Just unbelievable. Iraq is, of course, imploding in some respects. We're seeing a cross-border war. I don't even know what you call it between Iraq and Syria. It seems to be just some type of no man's land now. And, of course, what does the Obama administration do? They send about 275 troops to secure the embassy. We will talk about that later in the program. And all the developments in Iraq with Professor Juan Cole. But what does the Obama administration do to knock, I guess, the headlines about Iraq off the front pages? Now, they're not responsible for sending out all the neocons who got us in there in the first place. The administration is not sending out Wolfowitz and Bremer and Douglas Feith and John Bolton. The media is just welcoming them on. McCain. Now, that's just another coincidence. What, of course, does the Obama administration do? Well, reported today in the Washington Post, United States commandos have captured the suspected ringleader of the attack on the United States mission in Benghazi that killed Ambassador Christopher Stevens. Apparently, they have been surveilling this guy for over a year. There's been a plan to capture him. There's some suggestion that investigators were struggling to produce sufficient witness testimony and evidence to convict Abu Khatallah. And the fact that they picked this guy up suggests that they have that evidence to try him in a court of law in the United States. It was a military law enforcement team composed of American commandos and FBI agents that captured Khatallah on the outskirts of Benghazi. No shots fired, no civilians hurt, no one was taken into custody. Obviously, this capture of the ringleader of the attacks in Benghazi is a completely transparent attempt to distract the American public from Benghazi. And thereby, through that distraction, distract them from what the Bush administration did by taking us into a war of choice, which then goes back, of course, to trying to distract us from the return of Bo Bergdahl, which was in and of itself a distraction from Benghazi, which, of course, we know was a distraction from the IRS, which, of course, was a distraction from Fast and Furious, which, of course, was a distraction from the fact that President Obama was not born in Hawaii because he had no birth certificate, which, of course, was a distraction from Reverend Wright, who was President Obama's real dad, I think it was. And there you have it. Which, of course, was a distraction from Benghazi because they knew that Benghazi was going to happen in the future. I think I have just literally encapsulated for you what nearly every press release and every right-wing outlet is reporting today on this. Because apparently they're running out of things to talk about. In the next segment, we're going to be talking about the president's executive action that he took today officially. Touched on it yesterday, but it involves basically a statutory protection so that it's okay for you to be gay and you cannot be fired for it, at least in terms of federal contractors. And there's a couple of things that's fascinating about this executive order, and we're going to be talking to Arthur Leonard. He's a professor at NYU Law School. And one thing that's fascinating about it is that most people assume this is already the law for everyone. But in the majority of states in this country, first of all, there is no federal law that protects you. If you're gay or transgender, you can just get fired just because you're gay or transgender. And there's not even a state law in the majority of states in this country. But what is perhaps even more telling and more shocking, although I got to say that's pretty shocking, most people just assume, how is it possible that you can get fired just because of your sexual orientation? Just because you identify your gender as something different than you were born with. How is that possible? You can just get fired for that. It's not just possible. 20%, every study I've seen that says about 20% of people who are gay have suffered some type of discrimination in the context of hiring and firing because they're gay. But what's even more stunning, and I think is more telling, why is Benghazi such a big deal to these people? And there was some type of get to the truth of Benghazi event at the Heritage Foundation the other day. Now, they are claiming we didn't sponsor this event. We just gave the room to this Concerned Americans About Benghazi or whatever the group is. And there were two things that came out of there. One, which is getting all the attention, was the attack, the verbal assault on a Muslim woman who dared to raise the idea that there could be peaceful Muslims. What's getting less attention is actually what was presented at this Benghazi, hearing. I'm using air quotes. But when people ask me, and it's as if doing 5 hours of radio a day is not enough. I do the Majority Report, which is granted a podcast, although that's played on some radio stations. And then I do this program. And then people still want me to explain more about listen to the program. That's what I tell them. You have 5 hours a day. You can listen to me if you want. But people are, why are they so hyped up about Benghazi? And it is because the menu in which to create wedge issues is shrinking for them. Sam Stein reports in Huffington Post not a single member of the GOP leadership in the House or the Senate had anything to say about the president's forthcoming executive order. Not a single thing to say. This is stunning. The regime is turning us all gay, and they don't have anything to say about it. It's because they realize they're dinosaurs when it comes to this type of thing. But Benghazi, who could we possibly offend if we keep talking about Benghazi? Well, when we come back, we're going to talk about this executive order with Arthur Leonard, NYU law professor. We'll be right back. We're back. Sam Sater, Ring of Fire Radio. Check us out at ringoffireradio.com. The president has either signed or is about to sign, I should say, an executive order involving requirements by federal contractors that, and this seems just sort of just bizarre to have to say, you cannot fire people for being lesbian or gay or bisexual or transgender. To give us some of the implications of this executive order is Arthur Leonard. He's a professor at New York Law School and also editor of the Lesbian Gay Law Notes. Welcome to the program, Arthur.
Hi, glad to be here.
So just give us a sense of exactly what is involved in this executive order.
Well, we haven't actually seen it yet. The President authorized an announcement that he would be signing an executive order sometime soon, and various drafts have been floating around in the government. What most likely would happen would be that federal contractors who are subject to the existing executive order, which forbids discrimination by contractors based on race or religion or sex or some other categories, would also be subject to the requirement not to discriminate based on sexual orientation, gender identity. If an employee or an applicant felt that they had suffered discrimination, they would file a complaint with the federal agency, most likely the Department of Labor's Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, which would then do an investigation, would try to mediate, would try to come up with some kind of settlement. If it turned out that the employer had a policy of discriminating, that employer might be barred from future federal contracts.
And what are the possible exemptions? And my understanding is that part of the reason why the President has not settled on a draft at this point is because they're waiting for the Hobby Lobby decision. Is that
right?
Is that your sense?
I've seen reports to that effect. They want to find out how far the Constitution requires the government to accommodate private businesses on their religious objections of their owners to particular policies or legal requirements. This is a question that is somewhat unsettled. The Supreme Court has heard arguments in that case and is expected to issue an opinion by the end of its term, which should be within the next 2 weeks.
Well, here's my question. I mean, it's one thing to say that there's an obligation on corporations. I mean, I actually think that the bar is. Let me put it this way. It seems, well, it's one thing to say that there's an obligation for companies to provide health insurance, and that somehow this health insurance is offensive to the owner's religion. I actually find that laughable in some respects, but obviously some people, and probably 5 of them, won't find that as laughable. But it seems to me a completely different situation where you're under no obligation to seek federal contracts to do business, and so if the requirements are too onerous, you could just decide not to do it. How could there possibly be any legal reason why federal contracts would have to exempt you on religious reasons if you want to discriminate against gay people?
Well, I would agree with you on that. Part of the problem is that the federal government and many state governments, by the way, contract with religious organizations to provide various services. And religious organizations may have objections based on their theology to providing particular services, to dealing with particular people, and somehow the court has to strike a balance on.
Well, Professor, I don't.
Well, the point.
I don't want to interrupt.
It needs to have certain services done, and sometimes a religious organization is the only one that bids on the contract.
Well, that's fine. I understand in the context of, let's say, okay, a Catholic hospital. I mean, I'm not excited about the prospect, but what about, I don't know, Hobby Lobby says that we want a contract to provide, GIMP for whatever government project there is. I don't know if that's the case, but I'm just doing a hypothetical.
There is a big distinction to be made between private for-profit businesses and religiously affiliated organizations that provide services. So I don't see any basis for a religious exemption for a private for-profit organization, whether they're a small business or whether they're a big publicly traded corporation. I think part of the argument in the Hobby Lobby case is that although they're a relatively large outfit, they're not publicly traded. They're not owned by thousands of shareholders. It's actually a small family-controlled company in that sense. And so they claim a close identity. All of the owners of the business are devout Catholics who are very much opposed to the use of birth control and abortion and things of that sort. And so they think they shouldn't be compelled by the government to provide insurance for that for their employees. But I think this non-discrimination thing is a very different sort of thing. And while I can see the administration being cautious about waiting for the Hobby Lobby decision to be sure that what they're proposing is constitutional, I don't think that would provide a major holdup, and I can't see the Supreme Court adopting such a broad religious exemption in the Hobby Lobby case that it would affect this issue.
And just lastly, how many people could potentially be affected by this?
Well, potentially millions. It's the federal government is one of the biggest consumers of goods and services in the country. So they have contracts with thousands and thousands of corporations. It's been estimated that as much as 20% of the private sector does business with the federal government. These executive orders, though, generally only apply to reasonably large contracts. So a company that sells a few $1,000s worth of goods or services wouldn't necessarily be affected. But I believe the cutoff that some people have talked about is $10,000. If there's a contract for $10,000 or more, then the company would be affected by their non-discrimination requirement.
Arthur Leonard, professor from New York Law School, I appreciate your time today.
Happy to be with you. Bye-bye.
All right, folks, we'll talk more about this and, of course, Benghazi, because a lot of this is just a distraction from Benghazi, which is a distraction from Benghazi. 800-783-7412, 800-783-7412. I'll take your calls. Eight 800-783-7412. 800-783-7412. Sam Cedar, ringofireradio.com. I had Professor Jack Schneider on the Majority Report today. We spoke to him the other day about that Vigara case, and he has a lot more to say about the attacks on public education. Sometimes we disagreed a little bit on the intent of those attacks, as to whether or not it was just profiteering or whether or not it was just very wealthy people who come from the corporate world and assume that they know what they're doing in the context of education, and they have enough money to sort of bully their way in. But if you want to hear a longer discussion of this attack on education, I got news for you, folks. I'm going to be talking about this a lot. A lot on this program. More so than probably you'll hear on any other, well, probably on any other program, period. I don't care what what side of the aisle or what ideology it is. But if you want to hear a longer conversation about that, check out the Majority Report today at majority.fm. And the reason why it's so, I think, important to me and really important to you is we can see privatization at work. We can see the influence of money and a fully marketed, sloganized approach to the world, which necessarily comes from people who are in the business of sloganizing and marketing and have the money to back it up. And in this instance, sadly, or unfortunately, I guess we should say, we have just well-trained, well-schooled researchers and educators, professional educators, whose job it is actually to take a nuanced approach to problems. You take a kid, you see what their strengths, what their weaknesses are, what they respond to, what they don't respond to, and then you teach them. As opposed to you market to a mass amount of people one simple concept. And because that's what they do in their professional lives, when it comes to a political battle, a policy battle in broad strokes, they don't have the arsenal that they need, never mind the money that they need. Jack Schneider's one of those people, one of those rare educators that I've spoken to who can articulate this stuff. Diane Ravitch is another. She is an amazing spokesperson. But I digress, because I want to get back to this point that I touched on earlier in the program, that we have yet to hear any reaction from the GOP leadership as to the potential for President Obama to issue an executive order banning all federal contractors who employ about 28 million Americans from firing employees on the basis of sexual orientation. So it's not just in the context of them doing business with the United States. If you want to do business with the United States, you cannot be a company that will fire people for being gay or transgender. Likely there's going to be exceptions for religious organizations, but I can't imagine there'll be exceptions for companies who just happen to be owned by religious folk, or religious folk who want to impose their religion on other people. And this is what is going to come as a surprise to people. Most people apparently are not aware of the fact that in 29 states across the country, one can be fired simply for being gay. Period. No other cause. You're gay, you're lesbian, you're bisexual, you're transgender. Grounds for firing. In 29 states across the country. That's why we need some type of federal statute to protect people on a federal level. And that is the Employee Non-Discrimination Act. It has been introduced either in the House or the Senate for 20 years. I think the first time, if I recall correctly, the first time was in 1994. I think it was Gary Studs. And I think in the Senate, it was Kennedy, and I think he did it in 95 or 96. I can't remember. Hillary, you can check on that. While you're busy trying to poison me with whatever. That's a whole nother story. We'll have to talk about that later. I've got a producer who's trying to poison me. People are shocked at the notion that you can be fired because you are gay, particularly people who are not right-wing wackos or people who are in their, a lot of people my age and older don't think it's a firing offense, but the vast majority of people who do think it's a firing offense tend to be older. Why did President Obama, or why is he planning to do this now after at least a couple of years of pressure on this? I think there's a broader question you could ask. Why is President Obama starting to do a lot of these executive actions now? It's because he realizes he's not going to get anywhere with Congress. Nowhere. Not to mention, over the past couple of years, there's been a massive shift in public opinion on LGBT people. There's just been a massive shift. We just hit that tipping point where all the old bigots apparently have just passed away. And, there's a little bit of cynicism involved in this, but he's got, today in New York City, there's a DNC LGBT fundraiser, and the donors wanted this. Now, the donors have wanted it for a long time, so that's not it exclusively, but that has to do with the timing. But frankly, I don't care. It's a positive step. 87% of Fortune 500 companies already have voluntary protections for gay people in their hiring, firing, but there's still, I think Exxon is one of those that didn't. Not 100% sure about that, but I'm pretty sure. Now, despite the fact that the Republicans in the House and Senate had very little to say about this, you know, if they were running for re-election, and I guess some of them are, in fact, and maybe once it's written about, they'll say something about it. They don't want to get out ahead of it too much. We'll definitely hear from maybe not the leadership, but some of the base of the Republican Party. You know they're going to talk about it because, well, I mean, that's what gives them their meaning. Rick Perry the other day. Do we have that sound? What number is it? 11? Here's Rick Perry the other day talking about how he loves gay people, but he does consider them to be diseased, to have like a disease like alcoholism. This is Rick Perry.
I may have the genetic coding that I'm inclined to be an alcoholic, but I have the desire not to do that. And I look at the homosexual issue as the same way.
The homosexual issue? I look at it the same way. I look at it as a genetic disorder or disease where you're predisposed to being gay, but you should make the choice not to be gay so that you can live your life as a lie. Because I guess presumably being gay is also, you know, inhibits your ability to operate large, you know, heavy machinery and to drive a car. You don't want to ever find yourself driving a car while you're gay. Yeah, because I mean, it'd be very dangerous. Maybe there can be some type of breathalyzer that you would take that the police would stop you at a roadblock to see if you've been gay in driving. And so then Rick Perry apparently gets the memo that we're trying not to be so bat crap crazy this time around. And he goes on CNBC and he walks it back just a little bit. Well, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm going to leave it to the scientists to see if gay reparative therapy helps or hurts. Well, the scientists have already spoken about it. But I'll tell you why Rick Perry has to say this. And it comes in the form of an Oklahoma candidate for state senate. He's running for House District 91 state representative in Oklahoma. His guy's name is Scott Esk. You're not going to believe what this guy is, I guess, just even willing to say as he's running. I don't know, maybe you will, but no, I don't know you will believe it. So if you want to know why Rick Perry has to say this, and why, even though the House leadership will say nothing about it, and the Senate leadership will say nothing about it, we're going to hear the backbenchers bemoaning this new executive order. Stick around and wait till you hear this sound. We'll be right back. Don't wanna be an American idiot. 800-783-7412. Oh, Lord. Is it really the 20-year anniversary of the O.J. Simpson chase? I can't wait to not mention that ever again. That's the last of it I will ever mention. I'm not even going to say what it is anymore. I already finished with that. So here is how this piece, and I got to say, the way that these these local news reporters report on this guy's views on gay people is pretty stunning in and of itself. The piece on News Channel 4K4.com. Scott Esk is running for House District 91 state representative. On his website, he says he's a conservative who wants to apply biblical principles to Oklahoma law. But some are saying his views are extreme. I'll say, yeah, I'm one of those people who would say it's pretty extreme. This is clip number 8. Look at how they set this up.
And speaking
Clip number
of
8.
political surprises, a local man running for office in our state is suddenly in the spotlight because of his controversial views.
And it's a bright spotlight in statements posted on Facebook. He seemed to be advocating the death penalty for homosexuality. News Channel 4's Sarah Stewart's been following the story for us.
And she's live now. Sarah, a lot of people might find these comments very offensive.
Yeah, the person who brought this to our attention definitely did. Scott Esk is running for House District 91. On his website, he says he is a conservative who wants to apply biblical principles to Oklahoma law.
This sounds like an onion. This sounds like it's from a parody site. Well, that's certainly controversial. He wants to execute people for being gay. That sounds somewhat controversial, doesn't it? Well, we've got a debate here because there's controversy around this. You know, in the next hour, I'm going to be talking to Heather Parton Digby from the blog Hullabaloo about this report out and the way that it's being reported about the polarization that exists in America between left and right. I don't know what is the polar opposite of people should be executed because they're gay. Right? I mean, when we talk about the term polar opposite, we mean people who are on one pole, as in, let's say, the North Pole, and then other people who are on the South Pole. That's what polarization is, right? But we've got people on the North Pole, and then the rest of us are somewhere around in the middle. Just reasonable. Because I'm not advocating mandatory forced homosexuality on people. Or, frankly, I'm not advocating the death penalty for straight people. I'm just saying that gay people are people. Let's pick up. This is from the guy who found this information on this guy's Scott Esk's Facebook page is talking about. Here it is. This is clip number 9.
Morris runs the More Monthly magazine and MoreDaily.com. He was researching political candidates, trying to compile information for the public when a friend alerted him to District 91 state rep candidate Scott Esk.
This guy posted on Facebook that homosexuals should be stoned to death. My first response was, oh, you're nuts. Nobody would be stupid enough to do that.
But Morris found those postings from last summer on Facebook. At the time, Esk had commented on the Pope saying, who am I to judge on homosexuality? Esk posted Old Testament scripture calling for homosexuals to be punished. Someone asked, so just to be clear, you think we should execute homosexuals, presumably by stoning? Esk responds, I think we would be totally in the right to do it. That goes against some parts of libertarianism, I realize, and I'm largely libertarian, but ignoring as a nation things that are worthy of death is very remiss. Morris got a hold of Esk by phone and asked him about the statement.
What I will tell you right now is that that was done in the Old Testament under a law that came directly from God, and in that time it was totally just. It came directly from God. I have no plans to reinstitute that in Oklahoma law. I do have some very huge moral misgivings about those kinds of sins.
Even people that don't agree with things like gay marriage, nobody wants the death penalty for gays. I mean, that's the most asinine thing.
Yeah. But at least I guess the people of Oklahoma should be happy that he has no immediate plans to institute this in Oklahoma. And, I realize this goes against my libertarianism a little bit, to stone gay people, but, It's really important that we acknowledge what the Old Testament said. I thought the guy was a Christian. Isn't that the New Testament? Wasn't that the whole point of the New Testament? These are the people who are the base of the Republican Party. And I know people say, well, you're just picking on one state legislator from Oklahoma. I mean, what does that possibly mean? Look at every proposal that we see from the right wing today. And we're like, where did this come from? Who could have seen this coming? This is crazy. And just go back 4 or 5 years and look what's happening on the state level. This is who these people are. And I guess we're polarized. This guy wants to stone gay people, and I just want people to have rights. Man, we're both on the extremes of this issue, aren't we? We'll talk more about it in the next hour. 800-783-7412. Sam Cedar.